Now let's put that theory into practice with a few exercises. For each exercise, I'll tell you what kind of game you're in, a loose passive one or a weak tight one. So first you're in a weak tight game, one player limps, and you're one off the button with the ace of clubs, three of clubs. What should you do? Well, remember, in a weak tight game, you should generally raise more before the flop for three reasons. One is the big blind will tend to fold more, so you can get him out. Two is that limpers will tend to be more afraid of what you have and therefore be more likely to fold after the flop. And three, when you raise, you increase the size of the pot, so their folds after the flop are bigger mistakes. With ace-3 suited, you have plenty of hand to try to take a shot and raise. Now another weak tight example. An early position player raises, and one player cold calls. Folded to you in the big blind, and you have the jack of spades, 10 of hearts, jack 10 offsuit. What should you do? Remember, weak tight players fold too often, but they also don't raise very often before the flop. So the early position player's raise probably means he has a premium hand. In addition, the cold callers generally will have better hands than usual as well. It's quite unlikely that you'll be able to win after the flop without a showdown. So you should probably just fold. Now let's try an example from a loose passive game. You're under the gun, and you've got pocket threes. What should you do? Remember, in loose passive games, hands like pocket pairs and small suited connectors go up in value. In addition, you're not likely to get raised behind you, so you can usually slip in up front with the small pocket pairs. In a loose passive game, you should call. Let's try another loose passive one. You're under the gun again, but now this time you have 6-5 suited. What should you do? Before I said that small pairs and small suited connectors go up in value in a loose passive game, and that small pairs go up in value enough that it's worth calling with them from under the gun. Fortunately, small suited connectors really usually aren't strong enough to play from under the gun. So 6-5 suited should still be a fold. Now let's go back to a weak tight game. In this hand, a particularly tight player is in the blind, even tighter than average for this game. The first player folds, and you're next to act with the ace of hearts, 8 of hearts. What should you do? Again, in a weak tight game, you should tend to raise more before the flop. Ace-8 suited is a hand that might be a little borderline this early in position. But since the blind is particularly tight and will fold almost all hands to your early raise, you should go ahead and take a shot at this blind. Raise. Now let's try a longer loose passive example. Two players limp, and you're on the button with the ace of hearts, jack of hearts. So you raise. Both blinds call, and the limpers call as well. The flop is 10 of hearts, 7 of hearts, 6 of spades. So you have a flush draw and 2 overcards. Everybody checks to you. What should you do? Pot's large, and you have a great draw with a flush draw and 2 overcards. You're going to win this pot at least 35% of the time, probably more when you make top pair. If you bet, many players may call since it's a loose and passive game, and therefore you'll have a pot equity edge. Even if they don't call, it'll give you a good chance to take the pot on 4th Street. So you bet on the flop, and 2 of the players call. The turn is the queen of clubs, so you missed your draw, but it gave you an extra gut shot. The 2 players check to you. What should you do now? Well, the fact that 2 loose and passive players called on a 10-7-6 flop doesn't necessarily mean they have very good hands. They could just have a stiff 8 or 9, they could have ace high, they could have a small pocket pair, they could have a lot of hands. You have a very strong draw still, with your flush draw and gut shot. Also, you have a draw to a pair of aces or jacks, which may well be good. Almost half the deck makes your hand, and you have 2 players who probably don't even have very good hands. The pot is big, so you should bet. Protect your draw, hope they fold. If they don't, hopefully you'll make your draw and win a big pot. The next 2 examples are from a weak tight short-handed game, which may well be the most profitable game type possible. So the game's 5-handed, and the player under the gun, that is 2 off the button, raises. The next player folds, and you're on the button with king of hearts, 10 of spades. What should you do? The typical adjustment you might make in a short-handed game is to start 3-betting people slightly more loosely, because most people lower their raising standards because they think that doing so is necessary in a shorthanded game. But when you're playing against weak tight players, you definitely shouldn't do that. King 10 is a huge underdog against a weak tight player raising, whether the game's 5-handed or 10. You need to fold. Let's try another one. It's still the 5-handed game, and the big blind is a tight and predictable player. Player under the gun raises, and you're on the button, now with pocket aces, ace of hearts, ace of diamonds. Now what should you do? Normally in weak tight games, you should tend to 3-bet when you have a strong hand, because it puts more pressure on the blind and they're more likely to fold. Also, it gives you those advantages after the flop and it bloats the pot. But that's not true when you have pocket aces. Pocket aces is the best hand possible, and your opponents don't know you have it. If they suspect you do, if you 3-bet, then they'll be scared, as they always are, and tend to fold. The big blind will probably fold, and the initial raiser may fold on the flop. With aces, you want action. You don't want people to fold immediately, since your hand is so much better than average. So in this situation, you should probably just call, hope the player in the big blind has something worth calling with, and try to get some action after the flop.